Hello everyone, my name is Zoe, and today we're here to dive back deep into my findings from surveying 100 teenagers about their fashion habits and knowledge, as well as talk about where we are in the realities of the industry. Today we're going to specifically talk about location, and what responses I received when I asked the question, "Do you know where the majority of your clothing is made? Please provide the names of countries." And when I asked this question, here were the top 5 countries people talked about. 1. China. 2. No idea. 3. United States. 4. Vietnam. And 5. India. As we can see, out of 100 teenagers, the most thought that the majority of our clothing is made in China. So here is where we ask, what is our reality? What places produce the majority of our clothing? Many would say that there's no need to go Googling around the internet, and that figuring out the answer to this question can be as simple as looking at the back of our clothing to see what name falls under the Made In section of the tag. However, the story of the geography of our clothing is almost always not that simple. An illustration of this can be found in 2015, when Canadian brand Moose Knuckles, and yes, that is a real name of a serious brand, was accused of falsities behind their Made in Canada clothing tags. After some digging, the company was exposed for selling clothing that was actually being cheaply made in Asia, specifically Vietnam, and then sent to Canada for finishing touches such as buttons and zippers. The moral of this story is that designers can legally use that term, made in Canada, if as little as 51% of an item is made in Canada. In the end, made in may not matter nearly as much as made by. Here's the economics behind it. Sadly, the mentality of big brand chains that are in the industry of fast fashion is, how can I produce the most clothing for the cheapest price? And tragically, the outcome of that mentality is usually to export the clothing to be made in a location falling under the category of developing country that doesn't have secure labor laws and has desperate people who need to work. So now let's address the question that is running through all of our heads. How much of our clothing is actually made in China? Today, China is emphasized as the world's largest textile exporting country, meaning they make the most clothing and then ship it to another location either to be sold or to have finishing touches put on. According to Statista, in 2013, China accounted for more than 1/3 of the world textile exports, followed by the European Union and India. This graph shows how China absolutely trumps other countries in the amount of exports of clothing to the United States. However, things are changing, and with stricter labor laws and costs as well as more environmental policies kicking in, this medal China has been wearing for all too long might be given to another country. And as you can see from this graph of clothing production in China from December of 2017 to December of 2018 in billions of meters, things are already shifting. Now let's talk about those who guess that the majority of their clothing is made in America. And sadly, it would seem you would need a time machine to be right on that one. This is because in the 1960s, around 95% of the clothes Americans bought were made in the United States. However, when compared to the numbers now, where around 2% of the clothing Americans wear is made in the US, that is amazing. Like seriously, let's sit and soak that in. 95%. Okay, it's time to move on. This amazing reality quickly turned on its head as low-wage countries started to discover the wonders of cheap manufacturing. In addition to this, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was implemented in 1994 and made it cheaper to buy and sell things between Mexico, the US, and Canada. Because of this, foreign trade was on the rise, especially in the clothing industry, and it was no longer the story of a local industry. Because of these two things, the discovery of cheap manufacturing and the encouragement of foreign trade, less and less products were being made in America. The industry was changing fast. For example, between 1993 and 2013, the amount of garments sold in the US, made in the US, dropped from more than half, from 52.4% to 2.6%. But many still have hope for the Made in America tag to stick around and see the potential for changing the current trend. According to Nate Herman, Vice President of International Trade at the American Apparel and Footwear Association, AIFA, quote, "The number of clothes and shoes made in the U.S. has consistently increased over the last several years in what could be described as a small but growing trend." Now to address Vietnam and India. First, it should be said that it is very impressive that the majority of a group of 100 teenagers voted these two countries onto the board because they are two of China's top pieces of competition in the clothing production sector. And with lower wages and costs, these two countries have pushed to produce more clothing than China for a while now. For example, Vietnam now commands 14.3% of the U.S. apparel import market. And right now, with China's increasing wages for their workers, it seems more and more manufacturers will be pushed out of China into less developed countries with lower costs. Now, a broad generalization one can make after all that information was thrown at you is, yes, the majority of your clothing is made in China, but that reality is changing, and as rules and regulations demand more environmental and socially conscious conditions, we will no longer be able to rely on developing countries to exploit their people and their natural resources for developed countries' enjoyment. So next time you pull out your wallet and think about buying a new piece of clothing, think first about taking another look at your wardrobe, a friend's wardrobe, shopping secondhand, or buying from a sustainable company. In the end, the less we demand the production of clothing, the more we demand the protection of the people and the environment. I invite you to ask yourself these questions to continue this kind of conversation. 1. Do you think that the globalization of our textile economy is good or bad? Can it be both? And 2. What are ways we can pressure governments around the world to place more environmental and social justice-focused laws upon clothing factories? Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.